Welcome to another episode of Exercise Matters with me, Randall Cooper.
And me, Mick Hughes.
Support for today's episode comes from Premax Performance Skincare. If you're active, you focus on strength, endurance and recovery. But what about your skin? Sweat, friction and the elements take a toll. That's where Premax comes in. High-performance skincare made for high-performance people. From recovery creams to anti-chafe balms, massage creams to exercise-specific barrier creams, we help your skin go the distance. Keep your skin as fit as your body with Premax. Available now at premax.co.
And support for today's episode also comes from Physio. Health professionals, are you staying ahead of the game? Physio brings you cutting-edge education from world-class experts in sports and musculoskeletal medicine. Online courses, hands-on practicals and expert resources. All backed by the latest evidence and designed to fit into your busy schedule. To be your best, learn from the best. Get started today at Physio. Hi mate, happy Wednesday.
We do Wednesdays these days. It used to be Monday, but we're recording on Wednesday. Just allows you to warm up, during the week, just to make sure you feel like you're in the zone. What do you think? Sporting analogies just come thick and fast here.
It does. And it gives me a couple of days, or one day at least in the clinic to reflect on anything that pops up, the day before. I had the luxury of living a long weekend most weekends. So it's... by doing a Wednesday show, I've been in the clinic on a Tuesday, seen a few patients, got a little bit of, fresh patient stories to share and talk about and enlighten the listeners with, mate. So I like the Wednesday shoot. Yep, good call.
Yeah, no, it's good. Now we've had 4 exercises where we've really been talking about cardiovascular stuff. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit over the next couple of episodes. Today's episode is on concurrent training and also the interference effect, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. But next week, you're going to do something that's going to be interesting, I think, for this podcast, where we're kind of really starting to tap into sports medicine a little bit more than just pure exercise. And you're going to do an episode on tendinopathy. So looking forward to that. Tell us just quickly, what's going to come up in that episode.
A little bit about this one. It's for anyone that's probably physio or sports medicine, spoiler alert, I'm not going to, teach you how to rehabilitate a tendon so much. I'm not going to walk you through the stages of rehabilitation or whatnot. But importantly, what I want to talk about is how, I guess, tendons are kind of like this problem that almost always emerges in the middle to late stages of life, and how they behave very different to a muscle strain, and why they take longer, and what it is about them that I guess is a stubborn, annoying process that often lingers well beyond like a classic calf tear or a classic hamstring muscle tear, something like that. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. I guess what makes up a tendon, why it's different to muscle, how it behaves, what its role is in the whole musculoskeletal space, and then talk about some of the common pathology we see and why they kind of present when they do. So it's a good one. And then also importantly talk about what's effective in its treatment or not, because there's a hell of a lot of rubbish out there and some interesting but simple treatment options out there too. So stay tuned for that one, because that one's definitely one that'll help even the everyday listener, someone who doesn't have any kind of understanding of physiotherapy, sports medicine. I think the broad population will get a little bit out of that one too. So there you go.
Yeah, I'm glad we're putting, and I think we should put a few of these kind of episodes in where some of these more common kind of injuries, sorenesses, things that people carry are part of exercise and sports performance. I mean, having worked for 30 years in performance sport, there's not too many people that you meet who are serious about their exercise that aren't carrying something, and understanding what that something is and how it behaves and what to do about it, and particularly how you can prevent it, I think is really important. So now that I think this is 50 episodes, Mick, so if not, we've probably just tipped over. So now that we've hit 50, making sure that we're keeping things interesting but varied as well, I think it's great for us and our listeners.
Yeah. You'd be surprised, even the amount of things we could talk about. There is, it's even we, as we sort of talked about a couple of episodes ago, we talked about zone 5, zone 6 training, and that's very intimately related to that high intensity stuff that we shared in episode 1. But there's always little kind of offshoots to a main central topic. And exercise, physiotherapy, sports medicine, general performance, trying to get the best out of your bodies, like there's a lot to talk about, mate. So hopefully, people are enjoying it and getting something out of it, because I certainly love doing my background reading and learning a little bit more. And I'd like to be that guinea pig exercise. I'm currently doing calorie counting, if anyone's interested.
There's always something current with you.
Mate, got to count those macros, make sure that I'm getting enough protein and I'm not eating too much rubbish. So day 3 into weighing everything that I eat, and it's very enlightening.
You're weighing it now. You're getting the scales out. Oh, you are getting serious.
Mate,
okay.
Yep. My beautiful wife got me onto this. She's I think she's about 2 months into her journey into getting a better understanding of food, nutrition, and what kind of goes into her body. And she's had great success. She's lost without because we've previously if we go through periods throughout the year we're just not feeling our best, maybe feeling a bit heavy, we'd sort of get into like a light and easy or something like that, where it's everything gets shipped to you. But no, she's taken massive ownership of this and weighs everything, and she's lost 5 kilos in probably 6 or 7 weeks, and just by just calorie controlling and just really paying attention to what's goes into her body. So credit to her, she's done a great job, and I've been motivated by her to do the same. So watch this space.
Impressive. You guys are what they call the optimizers these days. So and
I'm going to get a ring. I'm getting a ring for Father's Day. I've been the
Aura ring.
The Aura ring. Yep. So I'll have something to talk about come early September. So there we go.
Okay. Well, it's extremely exciting in the Hughes household. It's all happening. I won't. I'll save my stories for another day. But let's get into today's episode, because I'm sure people want to hear about concurrent training and the interference effect. So let's start talking. So concurrent training I think it's actually really quite topical at the moment, because there's a lot of sports that are talking that use the frame hybrid athletes. Hybrid training, high rocks now. It's just, we did an episode, I think late last season, about high rocks and how to train for it. And we did tap into this interference effect a little bit, but essentially it's sports that require doing endurance and resistance training and requiring cardiovascular fitness and also strength and power and hypertrophy to some extent as well. And the interference effect is really particularly how endurance exercise may or may not affect strength, power, and also muscle hypertrophy. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take us and our listeners on a little bit of a journey, and we're going to go through some of the key studies that have been published actually nearly over the last 50 years, because the reason I want to do this is because I think there's a lot of fallacies that are out there. It's like, you shouldn't run, but cycling's okay if you want to maintain muscle mass. So I want to kind of highlight like where that came from and why that still may be discussed kind of in gyms and sports medicine clinics and with exercise physios, etc. And then take us through to the most recent published research, which has been published this year. So people get an understanding of where this has all evolved from and where we are at the moment. So that's my plan for today.
That's good. I like that, because it's probably good to see. You could probably pick a few different subtopics for sports medicine, sports physio, where a piece of literature, a research article was published in the 80s, 1980s, 1990s, and it's just stuck with us. Like, it's just a dogma that's just been passed down from generation to generation, taught at university, from decade to decade. And lo and behold, there's new research that always comes out that sometimes takes, I remember reading something from a few years ago that takes sometimes up to 17 years for new research to be adopted, in a wide audience, and to almost have a generational change, which is obviously a big part of what, without plugging learn.physio, but that's, part of, why what we do. We try to speed up that knowledge translation. That's why we run this podcast and various things to improve the education and to try and speed up that knowledge translation. But some people, unfortunately, and some institutions are still teaching things that are 10, 20 years out of date. And those messages have stuck with people, well past their use by date, that's for sure. So no, I'm looking forward to this one. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think this is a good topic to kind of highlight those those discussions and trends. So let's go back all the way back to 1980, Mick. And I know that 1980 is
Great year.
maybe
I
a
was born.
special year. I was going to special year for you. And this is really where the interference effect idea really became. It was a published study in the Journal of Applied Physiology and Occupational Physiology in 1980 by R.C. Hickson, of all authors, just the one author. And the title of it was Interference of Strength Development by Simultaneously Training for Strength and Endurance. Sorry, it is the European Journal of Applied Physiology and Occupational Physiology. And what they did is they had people in 3 groups and they trained for 10 weeks. And the 3 groups was a strength-only group. The strength-only group did 30 to 40 minutes of strength training 5 days a week. There was an endurance-only group. They trained for 40 minutes, 6 days a week. And then they had a combined group who did both. So they did 5 sessions of strength. They did 6 exercises of endurance. And from what I read from the paper and the commentary on it is they went hard too. This is back in the 80s, so everything was full gas. And so it wasn't a light combined program. It was basically just double stacking it. What they found in the study was that the endurance alone and the combined group raised their VO2 max by about 20 to 25%, which was actually huge.
Pretty solid.
The strength, as you'd expect, the strength-only group saw no improvement in their VO2 max. The strength-only group built their leg strength steadily and consistently over the 10 weeks. So as the 10 weeks kind of ticked on, they just continued to get stronger and stronger. The combined group also tracked well with their strength, where they pretty much mirrored the strength-only group for the first 7 weeks. But then from the 7th week onwards through to the 10th week, they actually found that the strength plateaued off. And in weeks 9 and 10, it actually started then to decrease. It actually declined. So the takeaway from that study back in 1980 was that essentially endurance training can blunt your strength gains and hypertrophy gains at that point. And that's where it really gained popularity at that point. Yeah. But the questions that kind of came back out of it were, well, was it really just the combination of doing strength and endurance, or was it the amount of it? There was, as with a lot of initial good research, there was more questions than answers. So that kind of triggered off some studies over the next 20 or 30 years. But you can see it's all the way back to 1980 where this is 1980 first kind of reared up its head.
And the comments they made and the conclusions they drew from that was kind of from the decline from weeks 9 and 10, you're saying? Not necessarily, not through the first 7 to 8 weeks of the study. Like it was kind of slow, steady trickling, but it was kind of 9, 10, boom, it fell off. And that's the conclusion they made.
That was the conclusion, is you do too much endurance training over a period of time, then your strength will suffer for it. So it's, there's an interference effect there, and that's where the term was coined. Yeah,
right. But the first 8 weeks were okay.
7 weeks, First 7 weeks, they improved strength, very similar to the strength-only group, but then it started to taper off and decline.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold claim to say that it's beneficial for the first 7 weeks, right? Like, it was only the last couple of weeks. It depends on what your goals are. Like, if your goals are, like, you got a 6-week block and you can do both things at the same time, I don't know. I don't see, doesn't sound like that's necessarily a bad thing. It's a pretty bold claim to make it after, obviously it's not sustainable. Like, 5 sessions a week, high intensity work. Like, that program sounds brutal.
Yeah, that's brutal. Well, let's be honest, mate. Like, this is back from, like, the study would have been conducted in the late 70s. So we're not 2026 here with the well-controlled trials that we kind of do at the moment. Yeah. So this was a bit different. And things have obviously evolved. That was awesome. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, is because clearly, like, some of that thought with people is still there. And there are some differences and there are some things we need to discuss in this interference effect, but a lot of this has been debunked. But I just wanted to kind of go back to the start. So then the next paper that really started to kind of progress this on, it actually took another 30 years or so. It's 2012 paper by Wilson and colleagues. And the title of this one is Concurrent Training, a meta-analysis examining interference of aerobic and resistance exercise. And this was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning in 2012. And they did a meta-analysis of 21 studies. They compared strength only with endurance only and concurrent training. And they looked at the effects on hypertrophy, strength, power, VO2 max, and body fat, actually. And they also dug in just a little bit more to the modality. So, like if you're doing running versus cycling, like how does that impact it? So, I got some data on that one. What they found with the study was that concurrent training still meaningfully built hypertrophy and strength. So they found that you can do endurance exercise and build the size of your muscle and also get your muscles stronger. The outcome that took the clearest hit, though, was power. Power definitely was affected in the concurrent training group, whereas the strength group maintained or improved their power. They also found in this review that the modality did matter and that running caused significant drops in lower body hypertrophy and strength, but cycling didn't, interestingly. So that they postulated, with this study that maybe it was because running is more high impact, there's a lot of eccentric load going on, which caused more muscle damage, and versus the cycling, which is very concentric and not as demanding on kind of the muscles as such. So that's again, like if people are out there and they hear that, don't run if you want to get big muscles, but you can cycle. Well, that's this 2012 paper where people kind of deduce that. But as I will go through, again, that's kind of been debunked with later research. They also found that dose mattered too. So the more frequent and the longer endurance sessions correlated worse with hypertrophy, strength, and power outcomes as well. So basically, the more you did, the worse those things got. But the interference effect was really quite local, not whole body. So they found that it was really the legs that suffered mainly and not the upper body. And you see this in the gym all the time with guys with little legs and big upper bodies and not the other way around. But the interesting thing, and this will please a lot of people who focus on their endurance exercise, is VO2 was never compromised. So even if you do endurance exercise and you add strength training into it, your VO2 max stayed consistent across the groups with this meta-analysis. So that's good news for us endurance athletes.
That's interesting. It's actually like you say that it's been debunked, but it's interesting hearing that, but then also reflecting on some of my patients. Like I just, what I said before, like I saw a patient yesterday and she's an elite triathlete and she's having some trouble with her knees, and she's concurrently training. She's doing her, riding, swim, bike work, running work, and she's trying to put in a couple of strength sessions per week. And it was interesting, I changed up her program recently and I put in a little bit more higher intensity lifting. So we're kind of doing 4 sets of 6 program twice a week, just pick an exercise off the shelf and we just go, squats, deadlifts, all those things. She said once we shifted from that, like from a 3 to 4 sets of 8 to 12, where it was just a bit more moderate. Once she got into the 4 sets of 6s, plus she was trying to do, 2 speed sessions per week and then a long run on a Sunday. Her DOMs carried on. Like usually DOMs in the muscles after doing squats and whatnot, when you change your program, at best it probably rolls around for 2 sessions. You get that 48-hour response, it waxes away. By the 3rd session, you're kind of not feeling those DOMs. 3 weeks later, she was still feeling those DOMs after her squat sessions and with all the work that she was doing. I was like, that's probably a little bit unusual. So, that's where I was like, well, maybe we need to sort of start reducing one of your levers. And we compromised on the long run. And so her Sunday long run, which was sort of getting out to nearly 20 Ks because she was sort of preparing for a half marathon. She goes, I don't have to do that half marathon anymore. I'm just going to come back to, 3, 6 to 10 sort of, short, sharp, punchy runs through the week and complement that with my 2 strength sessions. And it was just enough to kind of reduce that load, and it started to make sense and made her feel better. And that fatigue and that stress that was going through her muscles and her quads that was constantly sort of getting battered from the running and the gym work, it just started to balance out a bit better. So yeah, it's interesting. Like, you hear those, N=1 case studies where some of this makes sense, but then it's interesting sort of hearing the studies that go behind it. So yeah, that's sort of, one of my little challenges I've had of late.
Yeah, and without giving, I will give away the ending, but basically throughout all the studies up until this year, power is the thing that has been most affected with the concurrent training. Most of the research has been done actually on untrained or non-elite, non-performance athletes. So the elite population are their own bunch, and like there's actually not a lot of data on there. But the theory on why power particularly is the thing that is affected most is because power is very neural and fatigue related. So if you, like your patient, if you're doing everything and you're doing back-to-back kind of aerobic and strength sessions and you're doing high reps with, like trying to get strong or big as well, it's just, you can think about, well, at a muscular level, like, yeah, I think that theoretically that can help, but at a neurological level and motor recruitment level, it's like we might be smashing it and actually they cannot perform what they do as well. So it's all got to do with the quality of training, not the quantity of training, and making sure if you're going for strength, you're doing the right sets and reps. And if you're going to go for endurance and you want to build your VO2 max up, for instance, we've spoken a number of times about kind of doing like 4x4s and interval style training rather than just smashing yourself with 30K runs, for instance. So, yeah, there's a lot of science now, I think, that we understand how that fatigue can kind of set in. And I think it's a really good point.
Yep, that neural point you made is also too a perfect example of what happened with this patient too, because we'd counter movement jumped her, from a previous test, and then I would have expected in her 4 to 6 week window that she went away and did her training and did her thing, and then she was coming back. So I would have expected naturally her power to go up, then her box jump height and her counter movement jump height to go up. It absolutely flatlined. So she was clearly not neurologically, she wasn't sort of neuro, but her neuromuscular system was completely down-regulated, and it was just, she was cooked. So it was clear that, we'd sort of been really sort of redlining, and particularly for those last couple of weeks, she was kind of at her capacity. So, that's where we actually walked away from that session saying, look, I'm not going to give you anything new. We're going to keep exactly the same program. I'm just going to, strip back one of your, kind of long, exhausting, taxing sessions, and, let's come back in a month or so, see how you go. So, I think from a programming point of view, sometimes we can overcomplicate things and try to sort of, completely reinvent the wheel and completely overhaul someone's program. But if you just sort of actually talk and listen to your patients and sort of, get those little symptoms that are creeping out of them, you can make a nice change. So, anyway, I digress.
No, it's good. They're good points. I'm glad to discuss it because, one of the first questions I'd always ask, athletes when they came in, with an ACL or injury is like, tell me before your injury, like what your training's like. Because if they did train 6 days a week and they had 3 sessions a day and they're a professional athlete and they're used to that kind of load, that's very different to someone who runs 3 times a week around the tan in Melbourne, and you need to make sure that, that the system can cope with it. And it's not too much and it's not too little. It's the Goldilocks zone. But it's a nice little segue because the Wilson study, which I talked about before, didn't really answer the question of whether, doing both cardio or endurance work and resistance work within the same session was good or bad. And that's where 2022 analysis started to kind of dig into that a little bit further. So this was a study by Schumann and colleagues published in 2022. The title of this study is Compatibility of Concurrent Aerobic and Strength Training for Skeletal Muscle Size and Function, an updated systematic review and meta-analysis published in Sports Medicine. So these meta-analyses and continuing just to kind of roll thick and fast. Now, this one had 43 studies that was part of it. They compared concurrent training against strength only, and they looked for maximal strength, explosive strength, which is power basically, and also muscle hypertrophy. And what this review showed was that maximal strength showed no interference effect at all. So now you can do strength and aerobic work and looks all good. Muscle hypertrophy also showed no interference effect at all. Explosive strength was the one outcome that did suffer. So again, like when they've looked at more robust, newer studies, you can do both and you get strong, you can do both and you can get big, but you will lose power for it. So explosive strength was the penalty. And what they actually found was that it was most prevalent when the aerobic and strength work happened within the same session. So within 20 minutes of each other. And that was largely negated when separated by 3 hours or more. So if you're going to have a day where you're going to do both strength and endurance work, try not to put it together. And I understand people are time poor and they've just got they've got an hour and a half to spend in the gym. That's it. Well, your power's going to be affected by that if you're training high level. If you can split it, so you're doing one at one end of the day and one at the other end of the day, that's going to be better. So, yeah.
Was there any
interesting point?
Was there anything there about if power was done first versus did that differentiate? Because that would be something that I would plan for in those that just can't do like a 12-hour difference between one or the other. I'm like, well, we know power is going to rely on your neuromuscular system and the kind of nervous system input. Do that when you're fresh, and do that at the start of the session when you're more likely to be really switched on, ready to go, and not cooked from a fatiguing cardio session or something else. Was there anything in there kind of fuels my bias?
Not in this study, but in the next one there is. So why don't I talk about the latest study? There's a beautiful segue. Like it's magic carpet ride into.
I'm here awake, mate. Yep.
So the last study that I looked at, and this was published this year, 2026, by Held, H-E-L-D, and colleagues, Maximising Adaptations in Concurrent Training, an umbrella review of meta-analyses. So this is the umbrella review of meta-analyses. So it's the analysis of analyses. It's published in Sports Medicine this year. So they included 17 meta-analyses, comparing concurrent training against endurance only, against resistance only, and comparing exercise order. So they looked at resistance, then endurance, and then endurance and resistance for strength, power, hypertrophy, and aerobic capacity. So what they found was concurrent training versus endurance only. Concurrent training produced clearly greater strength gains. That's a no-brainer. Concurrent training versus resistance only. Concurrent training produced clearly greater aerobic gains, while strength, power, and hypertrophy essentially comparable. So again, this study has backed it up again in 2026 that you can include endurance work, and it doesn't meaningfully cost you strength or muscle size. What they found though was that exercise order showed a trend, favouring resistance before endurance for both strength and hypertrophy. So if you do want to maintain your strength, hypertrophy and power is a natural extension of that, do your resistance training first, then do your endurance, not the other way around.
Yep, cool.
So aerobic exercise doesn't really matter. And I think we discussed this kind of finding in the High Rocks episode that we did again. I think the takeaway that I took is just do what's most important to you first. So if you are really trying to build strength, if you are trying to build muscle size, do that first and then do your aerobic training next. If you are wanting to run a marathon or do an Ironman, do your aerobic first, try and wait 3 hours and then do your strength work later. So that's kind of where the research has landed at the moment. And I think it's really, really good for those people who are in sports such as AFL football and High Rocks and that kind of stuff, is that you can do both and you can improve your aerobic capacity and you can also improve your strength and your muscle size. And the data is there and the studies are there to kind of back up that you can do them. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can be both good at both things. And clearly, like with High Rocks, that's what people want. They have to be. They have to be strong and they have to be aerobically fit. Yeah. So that's where we are. Yeah. State of play 2026 on concurrent training and the interference effect.
That was a nice walk down, I wouldn't say memory lane, but it was just a nice walk through the decades, where it all started and where it is now. And really strong evidence, like, meta-analysis, an umbrella meta-analyses or umbrella review. It's 144 studies there. It's a pretty bloody strong evidence base there to make some conclusions about, one, its effectiveness, and two, and I think that's the big question I get asked all the time is, if I'm going to run, obviously ACL is my, big clinical caseload. And certainly I find the challenge, quite interestingly around about that return to jump stage. They've just spent 3 months basically, on land, stable to the ground, getting strong on a bike, potentially in a pool, and all of a sudden now we're saying, oh, let's try and get some running and jumping involved. And it's like, okay, where do I put it? I've got three things to do. I've got strength, I've got cardio, and I've got to jump as well. Where do I put it all in together? So for me, I often just, clump your running and jumping in together, and I'll do, jump first when they're fresh and then run second. And then later on in the day, we'll do our strength work. So I guess inherently my kind of, my clinical reasoning sort of fits, what's been shown here, which is really nice and reassuring. So, but yeah, it's challenging when you've got lots of levers being pulled and, lots of goals, trying to be ticked off, particularly for the triathlete, particularly for the high rocks athlete, CrossFit, any kind of, hybrid athlete, whichever it may be. It's a challenge to sort of how do you structure their weeks. This is kind of a nice, reassuring, episode to go away with, mate. Thanks for taking the deep dive.
And I'm glad that thank you. I'm glad that I tackled it as well, because I do look back, in the early days of my career as well as a sports and exercise physio, and I was guilty of it because, like you and I, particularly when we're dealing with injuries, and you and I have had a lot of experience in looking after knee injuries and ACLs, is people would be very weak. They'd lose a lot of muscle mass, and clearly they're the things that we wanted to improve quickly. And for the first, 3 or 4 months of their rehab, it's like, you don't have to do much bike riding other than get your knee moving again. And, I didn't place a lot of emphasis on aerobic training because I thought, you can do it later. And it may actually retard the strength and the hypertrophy gains that I'm trying to get at the moment. I was wrong. I should have had them kind of smashing out better bikes. Clearly, like, running is a different equation, but doing bike sessions, doing grinder sessions, getting in the hydrotherapy pool and doing running in the pool and that kind of stuff. If I had my time again, back 20 years ago or whatever, I would have my athletes doing a lot more of that stuff and return them back to full fitness faster as a result. So hopefully people can learn from my mistake here in the rehab space as well.
Yeah. Oh, very good, mate. Well, that's good lessons there for all of us. So no, thanks for tackling this very meaty topic. Well done.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Exercise Matters. If you enjoyed the chat, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your mates. A quick disclaimer: this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical or individual advice. Always seek guidance from a qualified health professional for your specific needs. Big thanks to our sponsors, Premax, High Performance Skincare for high performance people, and Learn.physio, world-class education for health professionals. Catch you next time.
See you next time.